Okay, just first a couple comments. Of course, we're planning on having a parenting seminar, parenting class the next 3 weeks or throughout the month of November. Don't see it so much as a how-to about parenting as it will be understanding God's design and purpose for family as a whole. There will be elements of parenting, of course, but I personally don't believe in what you might call a silver bullet for parenting. So if you're coming here and you're expecting Yuri is going to tell me how to absolutely for sure have believing kids, or Pastor Yuri is for sure going to give us some system or paradigm that is flawless and perfect, I don't think that is possible because of what we'll talk about today. That is not the picture that the Bible paints. And of course, there has been a long, or many, I should say, ministries and people and organizations who claim such things, that they can give you the biblical standard or way to parent. And I think that those, if you really understand what we're going to talk about today, might at best be relevant or helpful for a period, but if the Bible doesn't even speak that clearly, I don't know how a person can. So that'll become more clear in just a moment. But I also want to plug that we're planning on having a marriage conference with El Toro Baptist Church early next year, perhaps I think in January, so we'll have more details about that. But of course, the subject of marriage and subject of parenting do overlap a lot. And in fact, we'll see that today. Now, again, when we talk about the Bible and we talk about parenting, the Bible in some ways says a lot about that. In other ways, it says precious little. It says a lot about it in the sense that when we're talking about family and parenting, we're talking actually about civilization. We're talking about culture. We're talking about nations and peoples on the earth, like rising and falling empires, right? That is all really a function of family or parenting. You don't have those things unless you have children that are born, right? So it's a much bigger question. Of course, the Bible speaks to that. In almost every one of its pages is talking about people, civilization, culture, nations. On the other hand, if you look at it for Bible verses or Bible paradigm for how to be excellent godly parents, there's very, very few verses that you could really lean on and say, this is what the Lord's will is for you as a parent in the specific context of parenting. It says a lot about who you should be as a person, what faith looks like, of course, but in that specific category of like, how should you parent? Or how should you teach if you don't even have kids? How should you encourage the culture or your family members to parent their kids? There's actually not many verses at all. So today the goal almost seems too big. I think we can get through this all. We're going to just try to look at all that the Bible specifically says about parenting. And it's going to both be surprisingly, in depth, but also in a sense very short because of everything I just said. But first we want to turn to Genesis. We always go back to Genesis. Certainly when it comes to stuff like family and parenting, you're going to go there because it is in Genesis where it is spoken to us of the very nature of creation's design that we are to have kids, which implies parenting. I just want to make sure this is being recorded very quickly, and then move on. Okay. All right, great. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 to 31. I won't belabor God's creative acts in creating the world, the heavens, the earth, the vegetation, the plants, and all those things. Let's skip to the creation of man. Verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And every beast of the earth, and every bird of the heavens, and everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. These passages contain what's often called the creation mandate. That is a purpose for which God made us and made this universe. There's a word, anthropocentric, meaning anthropos is the word for man, centric is centered, that the universe is anthropocentric. It is centered around man, that we are the center of the universe and of this creation in the sense that God has placed us here and made all of this for us. The creation mandate, you can break it down many different ways. This is just one of the, the way I'm doing it, and others do it slightly different ways, but there's often very similar themes. I put them in verbal kind of terms, but the first one is image bearing. So God made us in his image, and that means something. Like we come into this world, or humanity comes into this world, and we are bearing the image of God. That is something we do. It's not just something how we were made. It has an effect and an impact over the things that we say and how we are in a different way than the beasts of the field and the fish and the birds and so on. The second thing is, and I misspelled multiplying. Boy. There you go. There you go. Multiplying? Come on, Yuri. Okay. Yeah. So if you're, it's going to erase it as soon as in case you needed to know, it's going to erase as soon as I go back. But here you have the command to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And so part of God's design and purpose for us was not just that Adam and Eve, the two of them alone in this anthropocentric universe, were just going to, go around having adventures on the planet and doing fun stuff, bearing the image of God. No, they were intended even from the beginning, even from the creation, to procreate, to be as God is in terms of having progeny. And it's not the same exact way that God has made humans. The process of humans making humans is different than the process of God making humans, I'll put it that way. But be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. So one of the prerogatives of humanity as they bore the image of God was to have more of themselves. Okay, so here, of course, the implication is parenting, as they become parents of children, to encourage them in some way to do the likewise. And so this process of multiplication, so I'm using, that's what I mean by multiplying there. The third thing involved in the creation mandate is subduing or exercising dominion. Subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, and so on. Even with this idea, I've given you every plant yielding seed, and so on. That there is subdue sounds like, and dominion sounds like a heavy-handed thing, like an oppressive thing or dictatorial thing. I like the idea of stewarding, which is what I put here. It is putting it in subjection, but not in a way that you just use things for your own benefit and blessing. Rather, it is a responsibility put upon Adam and Eve to take care of the creation, to bear the image of God, and even as they spread, to have a sense of responsibility over maintaining, first the garden, but then as they spread out the whole planet. The third one I put here, depending, which means that they were not meant to do this independently. They did just, have God is going to just tell them, all right, just keep your room clean while I go out, right? Like if I were to just tell my kids, hey, I want you to take care of the house while mom and I go on a vacation for a few weeks. That sounds nice, but it wouldn't work. They need to depend on our provision, our help, our guidance. And you see that here, that God gave every plant for food, and you could extend that to all kinds of provision. Now, God obviously providing oxygen. God's providing all sorts of things to them. He is telling them that they are ultimately living by His providence, His provision, and they're dependent on Him for everything that they really need. So humanity is relating to God as image bearers with the divine purpose to multiply and exercise stewardship over the universe, and they are supposed to depend on God while they do it. And that was even before the fall. God's intent for mankind was to expand, to thrive, to have human creativity expanding, and people going across the globe and forming what we call culture or civilization. Now, to go back really on this idea of multiplying, which necessarily implies parenting, these, of course, are things that these other elements here of image-bearing, subduing, stewarding, depending, those are things that Adam and Eve and then subsequent generations are to pass on that mandate as they multiply. Okay. Let's ask this question. When it says that they ought to be fruitful and multiply, what is in mind there is what we see in Genesis 2. And I apologize, I meant to have a slide for this, but you can turn in your Bibles to Genesis 2:20. The man gave, that's Adam, names to all livestock and to the birds of the heavens and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. So Yahweh God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that Yahweh God had taken from the man he made into a woman and brought her to the man. Then the man said, This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. So the idea of being fruitful, multiplying, told to Adam and Eve, is necessarily something to do with their unique relationship to each other. Here in Genesis 2, the created order of nothing in the creation was comparable to Adam. So this is a way of saying Adam was something altogether different than all the beasts and all the birds and all the fish and all the creatures on the planet. And nothing else could be his equal except for someone created from him as well, woman. So we'll probably get more into that in a marriage kind of conference. But the idea is Adam and Eve made for each other, the two of them uniquely created by God to carry out this creation mandate. Is this marriage, though? I mean, Adam and Eve, and, you don't have any other options, right? So, is this marriage, though, or is it just, well, you're stuck with each other, there's no one else here? We know this is talking about marriage, specifically, like the institution of marriage, not just a happenstance, right? There's circumstances that way. Because of Mark 10, and other places as well, but look at the very words of Jesus in Mark 10, and I apologize, I meant to have a slide for this, I don't know why I missed it, or did I? No, I didn't. Okay. Mark 10, when the Pharisees and scribes come to test him, they bring up a question of divorce. Is it lawful, Mark 10:2, to divorce your wife? Jesus answered them, what did Moses command you? They said, Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of divorce and to send her away. And Jesus said to them, because of your hardness of heart, he wrote you this commandment. But from the beginning of creation, and he's quoting now Genesis 2:1, God made them male and female. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. And what therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. So what does God appeal to when he wants to define, or Jesus appeal to when defining marriage? He goes back to Genesis 1 and he goes back to Genesis 2. So we are talking about the institution of marriage, right? Now, they are then the first couple, and of course, by extension, they are going to be the first parents. And you would think, given how important we all believe, I think, parenting is, Genesis would tell us a little bit more about the way to be good, men and women who are fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion, right? Like, how do we do this creation mandate as parents? And how do we pass that on? Well, instead of getting a very good, explanation of what that is supposed to be or to look like, instead we have Genesis 3, which is the fall. So before we could even figure out what it would have looked like in a perfect world, Adam and Eve fall into sin. We won't rehearse all that happens in Genesis 3. Most of you know the story. The serpent tempts Eve. She takes a bite of the fruit from which God said, don't eat this tree, from the fruit of this tree. Adam then takes the fruit from Eve. Adam eats it. They fall into sin. And now we're on the other side. We're on the other side where there's now sin in the world, sin in the hearts of men and women. And that does not change, though, the dynamic of the creation mandate. It obviously colors every aspect of this, though, with sin. So we know that according to actually Genesis 9, that Noah is going to be told to be fruitful, multiply, subdue the earth, and so on. So we know that the creation mandate is still in effect, but now we're going to see it from the lens of sin. What happens immediately after Genesis 3? I don't want to be too weird, but the first thing that happens is we're told that Adam and Eve have sex and have a kid. So we are in parenting immediately. Genesis 4:1. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. What is Eve's attitude about being a mother? Well, it's kind of an incredible thought. You could translate it, I have gotten a man with the help of Yahweh, but the NET translates this, I have created a man just as Yahweh did. I've created a man just as Yahweh did. In other words, either translation, there's a direct connection between bringing a child into the world and the handiwork of God. Either way, right? Either way, God's hand is involved in bringing a child into the world, and it's intended to be very profound. This is a profound thought that Eve has here. Again, she's the first mother. No one has experienced this before. You know how kids come into the world. You know the process. She was the first woman to experience it, the first woman to see a child come out from her own body. It's an incredible thought when you start thinking of that. Absolutely humbling. And that's what I think Eve is communicating. The word for I have gotten a man, it sounds like the word Cain. And that's what she's expressing in the name. I can imagine she just about probably lost her mind. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I hope that if any of you have experienced pregnancy and childbirth, you were astounded. I was. I remember when Anna was born, and just the most, not to weird you out, Anna, but it's just the craziest thing to think that a man and a woman coming together created a human being that did not exist, previously. That, I don't know how a person who creates another person could be an atheist, right? Like, that's kind of what's being said here. Like, it's like she had a child and she said, this is God. This is the handiwork of God doing this. That's so fundamental to the process of child rearing, is this connection to the hand and work of God. Now, having said that, The next verse is, again, she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. So, completely skips between verse 2 and 3 their childhood or their parenting, right? Like all of a sudden they're adults. Like one's keeping sheep and the other is a worker of the ground. Spoiler alert again for multi-thousand-year-old text. What happens between Cain and Abel? Two brothers, the first two children of Adam and Eve. What happens? Cain kills Abel.
Cain was able to murder.
Yeah. And I am very deeply interested from a parenting point of view. What happened here? Right? What happened here? Where's the parenting tips? Where's the do's and don'ts? Where's the here's how you make an Abel and not a Cain? Nothing. Right? Nothing. The Bible tells you nothing about their parenting style. It doesn't tell you anything about why Cain was the way he was and why Abel was the way he was. We don't have any other window into the first parents as far as how did they raise them. I don't know. As I thought about this more, and this is going to be kind of a theme here, like, why doesn't God tell us more about this? Because I have a vested interest. I don't want Uriah and Ezekiel to hate each other or to hurt each other or anything like that.
Their choice of the sacrifice, one chose the right.
Right.
Sacrifice and
Yeah. I mean, Cain had a bad heart. We know that, and a bad attitude towards the Lord. And as far as we know, they're presented as adults responsible for their own actions. They're not going to be able to blame their parents for anything. We kind of know that, right? I guess by implication we could say that. But from Adam and Eve came both a God honorer and a murderer. Did they treat them differently? We don't know. Did they treat them the same? We don't know. It is. Now, Genesis 4:17. Cain likewise has marital relations with his wife, and not to get deep in the weeds, well, where did his wife come from? Well, it would have been a sibling. I mean, talking about Adam and Eve are the first people. Everyone's related at that time. It's part of the nature of it. The Bible doesn't talk about every single kid they had at this point. They could have had many other daughters and many other sons. We're talking about spans of life, hundreds of years, like 1,000 years of life. That's a lot of kids to have. So we're not told a whole lot about that, but just if you ever have the question, well, Cain's wife was a sister by necessity. That's the way it was. We can talk about that more if you want, or any issues you might have with that. In the NET, that it titles this section from Genesis 4:17 on. It calls it the beginning of civilization. And we see in it the image bearing, the multiplying, the building of culture, the dominion over things. Look at it. We have Enoch was born to Cain, then he built a city. So there's culture, a civilization gathering together. He named the city after the name of his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mehujael. Mehujael fathered Methushael, and Methushael fathered Lamech. And Lamech took two wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah. Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. So now we have characteristics of these cultures and civilizations. Here's how Jabal lived, is he was more known for subduing, having dominion over the livestock. Well, his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. So here's an image bearer. God has created music and arts and things like that. So over here, Jubal, he's creating culture, civilization, and he's bearing the image of God and showing that through music. Zillah also bore Tubal Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. Instruments there, not like musical instruments, but like tools. So now we have, again, subduing the natural minerals of the land and the earth being formed by human beings made in the image of God, and they're subduing it, exercising dominion over it, and so on. So I think you get the picture there of the creation mandate, coming into play with the generations coming after Adam and Eve, hundreds of years passing, many, many, many children. I think when we went to Catherine's grandmother's funeral a couple years ago, there was like 40-something great-grandkids, right? So you think like none of them would exist without great-grandma, right? Like 40 people from one person. And that was within the lifespan. She was, I think, in her 90s or so. So less than 100 years and, 40 generations. And it multiplies mathematically. These things multiply very fast. So you had very quickly a spreading. Here, this is an ancient civilizations map and timeline. It might be kind of hard to read, but you have Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, the Indus Valley, and the Huanghe Valley. Those are kind of like generally agreed upon 4 very early civilizations that went out. People think from like the cradle of civilization there, where we think things happen in the Middle East. So you can see kind of color-coded. You can look that up. This is not anything novel that I'm presenting there, but generally accepted even secular history.
Americas are more recent, right? Because they're the last ones to be.
Yeah. So you have, generally speaking, like European culture, the Indus Valley, which is kind of India, and then the Asian culture, and a more European. What did I already say? Yeah, the European culture, the Egyptian kind of culture. Okay. So after that in Genesis, you get a lot of genealogies. Do you have any sense of what parenting or family looked like in these early chapters? Nothing. We do know how it ends up. How does it end up? Yahweh saw, chapter 5 is all the descendants of Adam to Noah. What happens in Genesis 6? Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. I don't know why, but that's one of the verses in my head that sticks out, because it's such like an overwhelming statement. You're talking about a worldwide, every person in their heart was just always thinking just the worst kind of stuff. Everybody was like that. And Yahweh regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So Yahweh said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I'm sorry that I have made them. Yes?
The Jewish people were not in existence.
Right.
So how would they have known the blood and the sacrifice of the blood, or how to be forgiven by God at that point?
Right, like what does it mean to relate to God?
In those days, how would those people have been saved prior to the Jewish people? And also, what about the Jewish people? What about the people at the other ends of the earth?
Yeah, so one thing, that's a good question about whether, how did people get saved, say, before the time of Abraham and so on? Well, from Adam to Noah, let's say, the idea should have been, and I assume from what we're talking about in terms of the creation mandate, is that Adam and Eve would have passed on to their kids the creation mandate. You're made in the image of God. You are to, multiply and be fruitful and multiply. You are to subdue or exercise dominion or have stewardship over, the whole planet that you're seeing before you as they spread out. And you are to live in dependence upon the Lord. Now that fourth part, dependence before the fall, just meant, look, the world God has made is here to sustain you. You can create food, shelter, clothing from it, etc. I think after the fall, we know that when God clothed them with garments, animal skins, that meant an animal died to cover their nakedness and their shame.
But was it grace through faith even at the
Yeah, so it always would have been...
From the beginning?
Yeah, salvation is by grace through faith. So they needed to depend upon Yahweh for everything, including having a right relationship with them. Now, was there a formal sacrificial system? You kind of get the idea that they picked up on that idea very early on, is an animal dying to cover my sin. I think that would have been part of depending upon him. It kind of doesn't matter, though, because no one is living that way. The bottom line is, when you get to this point, no one's living that way. Either the parents failed to pass on that creation mandate, or the people's heart, like Cain, might have been told that their whole life and they just didn't do it, as a matter of their sinfulness.
So it's still a heaven and a hell then?
Yeah, there's a presence of God and there's condemnation. Yeah, I would say that, yeah.
So, but when the Jewish people came, theirs wasn't raised through faith, it was following the law. And the sacrifices, which gave them temporary forgiveness.
It was still salvation by grace through faith, because remember, Abraham believed and God credited it to him as righteousness.
Okay,
So they could, in other words, you could offer the sacrifice, but would he accept it? No. I mean, we looked at Amos 3 and 4, right? And how they're offering sacrifices, but was God going to judge them? Yes, because they didn't have faith when they're offering it. So offering the sacrifices without faith was like bringing filthy rags, to him, that kind of thing.
But the rest of the world, apart from the Jewish people, it was still, say, trusting in God.
So
in the time of the law, of the Jewish law, and the sacrifice.
Right, so I think that's like a bigger picture of like, what about non-Jewish nations, even now, or whatever. I would say that the fate of all peoples, it tends towards this, Genesis 6, that they're guilty. They're going to sin. Knowingly, they're going to sin against God. That's like Romans 1, that the wrath of God is revealed upon all unrighteousness of man. So, yeah, Gary.
Well, kind of the old adage of what goes around comes around. God's first children gave him grief. Every parent after that, their kids are going to get grief.
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah. But I find it, again, kind of fascinating. Again, I was looking at this through the lens of like parenting. What does the Bible say about parenting? Like, you would think we would get some kind of idea of what not to do or what they did do. Because you have all these generations. Genesis 5 is literally just, this person lived this many years, he fathered so-and-so, and then that person died after fathering this, and they had other sons and daughters who died. Like, you could read Genesis 5. It's literally about parentage from a genealogical point of view, but no commentary. Nothing stated about what they did right or what they did wrong, just assumptions that lead to Genesis 6, that it was bad, whatever it was. I don't know if the parents were bad or the kids are bad or both. You get to a point where the whole earth, you could say of it, that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. I think sometimes the kids are bad, but I don't know if I could say this about them. You know what I mean? Like, only every thought of their heart is only ever evil continually? Like, no. I just imagine a world, a planet like that. In one hand, you're supposed to look at the flood and in a certain sense maybe feel pity upon the lost, and you always depict them as like clamoring, to get onto the ark, and I'm sure they would. But on the other hand, these are the worst people that you ever met in your whole life, and they're getting what's coming to them. I don't think it's wrong to feel compassion on them, but I also don't think it's wrong to feel like you did this to yourself, you deserve this. In any case...
Doesn't Eastern Orthodox, they don't believe kids are sinners?
Yeah, right. I don't know if Catholic Church does either. Oh, no, wait. I could be wrong about that, but I think you might be right about Eastern Orthodox. In any case, though, we see a world that's in calamity. You know the story of Genesis and Noah and the flood and all those sorts of things. I won't rehearse that. But when Noah, his 3 sons, and all of their wives, 8 people, come to rest after the flood is wiped out. This is what we read in Genesis 9. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And then kind of a weird statement he makes is, the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens and things that creep on the ground and so on. It's a slightly different take or expression than in Genesis 1 and 2, right? Like, you're going to subdue, all of these creatures, and you're going to have dominion over them. Now it's like they're afraid of it. You're still going to have it, but now there's like a hostility. It's almost as if the creation has a collective memory of the evilness and wickedness of man afterwards, and so there's going to be a tension. You have the implementation, actually, of the death penalty in Genesis 9. So you get the idea that the wickedness of the earth as it was in Genesis 6, that perhaps some of what would have stayed that is if you made laws like, if you kill someone, if you murder someone, you should be also wiped off the face of the planet, right? So that idea there is stipulated. And again, and you be fruitful, multiply, increase greatly on the earth and multiply in it. Creation mandate here after the flood of Noah as well. So civilization is not quite a failed experiment, but there is definitely much difficulty. Now you might say, Noah, mayhaps we are starting over with a new family. You got Noah and his kids. Parenting tips from Noah. Well, if you look at Noah's life, shortly after the flood, he becomes a keeper of vineyards. Genesis 9, 20 through 27. He gets drunk. He lays uncovered in his tent. His sons see him. One of them, it kind of mocks his nakedness or looks at his nakedness. It's shameful. The other two don't. When Noah wakes up, he curses the one, the youngest son, and then he blesses the other two. So Ham is condemned. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers. And he says to Shem and Japheth, may the Lord enlarge your tents. So blessing. I'm not quite parenting advice. I don't know that it's like you're getting finally a little window into how the parents treated their kids. This is literally like the first time you have like, let's see how Noah handled it. Now they're grown men, they're adults, so you're not even seeing parenting of kids at this point. But they're all, in my opinion, they're all knuckleheads. Okay, well, not all, but Ham and Noah both. You don't get a very good glimpse of parenting or tips or anything like that. Yeah, from Ham, Shem, and Japheth, you have the spread of the nations once again, or actually, no, you have the opposite. They come together, they build the Tower of Babel. Remember that? Yep. And the nations, and God knocks down the Tower of Babel. He causes confusion amongst their nations. They finally disperse, right? They're told to be fruitful and multiply, spread across the earth. They don't. God graciously, instead of saying, I'm tired of this, I'm just going to wipe them out again. No. He just confuses their language. They spread out to the world, and they create civilization and culture again. That's Genesis 11. Genesis 12, the narrative of the Bible, from then on, it stops being about the nations, right? These groups of people or the world. It focuses on Abraham and then his descendants from Genesis 12 and on, okay? So, and actually not just Genesis 12 and on, but Genesis all the way through to Malachi, the last book of the Hebrew Scriptures. You're very focused on really one group of people.
That one verse about Ham, the justification for African slavery.
Yeah, well, it's actually been like lots of weird religions have used that to say there are cursed, certain people are cursed. So yes, that has happened. I want to stop here now and ask a question, especially if you've been a Christian for a while. Is there a biblical figure that you look up to as an example of a good father or mother? So I'm asking you now, especially if you've been a Christian for a while, and not counting your own parents, own personal experience, but do you look to any biblical figure as an example of being a good father or mother? Yes. Huh?
Mary and Joseph.
Mary and Joseph. Okay. As parents?
We don't know.
As parents?
Yeah.
So what do you know about how they parented Jesus?
Oh, look at Jesus.
Yeah, had a perfect son, so it's cheating. It's cheating when your son's perfect. Yeah, you don't have to be the perfect parents, right? Ruth and Boaz, you just mentioned Ruth and Boaz. What do we know about their parents? Who is their son? Do you guys remember Ruth and Boaz's son? Obed. Who is the father of Jesse? Who's the father of David? What do you know about them as parents? Though, as a good father or mother figure. Now, you know them as good men and women, right? You're listing good men and women. But if you're thinking about, this is my biblical role model to follow as a mom or a dad, not a husband or wife. Let's be kind of specific. As a father or mother. Do you have one? Abraham? As a father to Isaac, right? You know, I thought about what.
Was it Samson's parents concerned for his choice?
Yes. Well, we'll get to that. Good. No, you guys are actually on it right now. So, Abraham, you're like, what's the greatest thing he did with his son? Try to sacrifice him, right? Parenting 101. Yeah.
Biggest treatment of Isaac, of
Ishmael. Not very good, right? Not a good example. You think of, so before Isaac, though, Sarah says, I'm not having a baby. I don't know if I believe what God said. Here, take my servant Hagar and have a child with her. And he has Ishmael. Well, then Sarah starts to disdain Hagar and Ishmael. So what does she demand? Send him away. Send him away. And Abraham, agrees? Parenting 101? Right? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that, right? Yeah, David.
How does Samuel's mom do, right? She leaves him there, right, at the church and then continues to check on him.
Yeah.
Continually.
Yeah. Hannah and Elkanah. So it seems like in the case of Hannah with Samuel, it's, her womb is closed. She cries out to the Lord opens her womb, but she had made a promise. If you give me a child, I'll give him to the service of the priest. So from very little, maybe early on the first few years, I think, she nursed him, but then she basically released him to the priesthood. So parenting 101, right? Like she doesn't really parent him. Now, I'm sure she still had an influence, still loved, still was there, but you don't have any window or insight into what that would have looked like. It's an interesting question, isn't it? Like when you start thinking about biblical examples of good parents. Moses' mom?
Yeah, she sent her off and then he raised her.
Yeah. So there, it's like, so Moses' story, right? The midwives are saving the children. So he gets put in a basket, and Miriam, Moses' sister, follows. And when he's picked up by Egyptian royalty, she comes up and says, I know a Hebrew woman who can take care of him for you. And it's her mother, which is Moses' mother, right? So, but do we get an idea of what the parenting looked like? Not necessarily, right? We know that's providential, that's good, right? That's a blessing that happened the way. But what do you know about his upbringing? Well, he was, raised in the courts of Egypt, actually, more than as a Hebrew. He was aware of his
parenting is in Proverbs, right? In Psalms.
And we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah.
John the Baptist, Elizabeth and
Zechariah. Yeah. So, what do we know about his how they parented him and raised him?
Did he leave him to go to the desert?
Well, when he was a man, right? So, what do you know of his childhood? Nothing.
Mary and Joseph lost their kid at 12.
Yeah. Parenting 101, So, so, no, it's funny because we have these weird little stories and anecdotes from childhood, but rarely do we ever see any kind of clear examples of what their parenting was or looked like. Yeah, Gary.
You know, since each person, each child is unique, you can't really put it down into steps 1 through 10, how to raise them.
Right?
Because each one is an individual and is going to have individual characteristics.
Right. And that's why I think it's funny when any time certain movements, and we'll talk about this in future sessions, there have always, not always been, but there have been throughout Christian history, movements where someone will say, and maybe this is more particular to modern history, if you follow these rules, I can pretty much guarantee your kids are going to be Christians. Well, that's very manipulative of desperate parents. A desperate parent should be redundant, right? Like, all parents are desperate. And if you promise them, here's a 5-step way, 10-step way, even 20-step way to have kids are going to follow the Lord, will they not do it? Will they not put up the money? Of course. But I think the truth is closer to what you're saying, Gary, which is why there's probably a bajillion Christian parenting books, because they apply when they apply, and maybe that works in your case and not yours. But we'll get there too. Here's a list of monogamous couples in the Old Testament, okay? I think this is almost all of them. Now, you're like, this is kind of a short list. Now, there might be...
Gomer was monogamous?
No, so we'll get to that. Gomer wasn't. Yeah. Hosea I'm bringing up because of you do have a little bit of an insight into the parenting, right? It's not super great either. Now, there might be more, of course, because in a genealogy, it doesn't necessarily say whether they were, had one wife forever. But in terms of when the narrative talks more about them at all, this is what we get at. So Adam and Eve, which we talked about, we don't have any indication that Adam had any other wives, right? You think about that. That's kind of important, I think. Noah and his wife, remember on the ark, it was just Noah and his wife, Ham, Shem, Japheth, and their wives. So we talked about that. Isaac and Rebekah, as the patriarchs go, they are known for being monogamous. And Isaac actually has the least bit said about him. From Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Isaac is the most boring. And maybe there's something to say for maybe if you just don't have a bunch of kids with a bunch of other women, it's a little less family drama. So, Isaac and Rebekah. Joseph and Asenath, an Egyptian woman. So remember, Joseph got sold into slavery, went to Potiphar's house and to Pharaoh's house. Pharaoh gave him an Egyptian wife. Her name was Asenath. Joseph had 2 sons. You remember?
I didn't know that.
Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay, then you have Moses and Zipporah. It's not ever said that he had another wife, except there is a peculiar mention in Numbers that, in Numbers 12:1, that he had a Cushite woman. Now, some commentators say, maybe that was Zipporah, but likely not. But it doesn't also seem like that this was another wife with Zipporah. So most commentators say Zipporah died and he married this Cushite woman. So we'll put him maybe with an asterisk, Moses and Zipporah monogamous. Joshua of the conquest seems like he only had one wife, no other wives mentioned. Boaz and Ruth, which was mentioned just a moment ago. Job and his wife. Doesn't mention that he had any other wives. And Hosea and Gomer. There I'm mentioning that really because now she is unfaithful. He is committed. When you talk about parenting lessons, so all of these people, by the way, do you have, let me back up a little bit. Who are the kids of Moses and Zipporah? Can you name them? Anybody? Bible trivia? It's Gershom and Eliezer. Now, Gershom in Exodus 4 was not circumcised. And so if you remember, Moses got very sick until Moses, actually, I think Zipporah circumcised him and then threw the foreskin at Moses, said, "You're like a bridegroom of blood to me." And I've talked about what that represents is for Moses not to have circumcised his own child. Because remember, he was living in the desert, right? He was not believing in the covenant promise of God.
So
So how is he supposed to be the representative of the covenant promise of God and lead the people out of Egypt when he had not demonstrated that he believes in it by circumcising his son? So that's why he got very sick. It was necessary. He needed to circumcise his son. I think Zipporah figured it out before
Was that
he
a
did.
denial of his faith?
I think it was at that moment, because he's about to die. Moses was going to die, it says. So I think that's when actually Moses believed. So really, that in the covenant, now that might seem odd to say after the events of Exodus 3, but that's another subject. But isn't it weird that you would think Moses and Zipporah, very important figures, you know nothing about their kids. You don't know anything about how they parented. You get zero, almost, except for Exodus 4, you almost get zero insight into them. And Gershom and Eleazar, they don't figure into the narrative at all. Nothing happens with them. You know, they have descendants, the Gershomites and so on, but like they as people, you get nothing about them. You know, you think like this is a power couple in the Bible, and nothing about their parenting, and their kids are kind of, not to insult them, but they're nobodies as far as the text is concerned. Yeah.
Did Isaiah have a wife and children as well?
Yes, that is one I didn't put up there, but it seems like maybe Isaiah did have a wife, so that's a good call.
Wasn't she taken from him? The God warned him that he would have to lose her very fast? Or was that Ezekiel?
I don't remember, but you might be right. I know there's an interesting like dynamic going on
He was
there.
very, very not married long, and the Lord said he would lose her.
Right.
I remember it was Ezekiel.
But Isaiah it should be in there too, so that's a good catch.
Who was the priest who spoiled the two kids?
Eli? Oh no. Yeah, Hophni and Phinehas. Yeah, his two boys. But I don't know that he had, if it was said clearly that he had one wife. So we're just, again, there could be more.
That seemed like the most detailed parenting stuff.
But they're adults, you know, when that happens too, right? So we catch a lot of interactions as adults, and we get some things as adults, but as far as like when they're kids, which is I think the time we're kind of, everyone, when they think of parenting seminars, Christian parenting, you're thinking about, oh, what do we do with the little ones and all those things, but most of the discussions you're talking about adult and grown children.
God wanted to keep the Bible something you could carry around.
No, I think there's some truth to that too. Although back in those days, they got big scrolls and things. But Hosea, I'm mentioning him a little bit here, both because there was a one side, you know, like he for his part was committed. It was his wife that was unfaithful, but it was an entire parable. Now imagine, here's again, like the significant thing about God bringing the children into their lives was to be a living parable to them. So if you remember, you're gonna have kids with Gomer, who's a whore, and Hosea 1:4, and Yahweh said to him, call his name Jezreel, for in just a little while I'll punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I'll put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. So, a judgment. Verse 6, she conceived again, bore a daughter, and Yahweh said to him, call her No Mercy, for I have no more mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them at all. And then when she had weaned No Mercy, she conceived and bore a son, verse 8, and Yahweh said, call his name Not My People, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. Wow. So it's like, this is not parenting, you know, like this is if you're a prophet, you do those things. But I bring this up just like, here's how, I don't know how he was gonna parent in that context where your kids are living parables about the judgment of God. You know, what do you say? What do you teach them? And do we get any insight as to how he raised those children? No, they just exist to be a parable.
I've always wondered, like, why parents name their kids Cain? I mean, these people had just never read the Bible.
I know, or yeah, Cain, Jezebel, you know, things like that. So, so here's our what we might call, oh, like these are the good parents, and you're still like, not only are they not super great as parents almost demonstrably, we don't really get that much in the way of how they parented at all anyway. Well, now let me ask another question. You think of think of your favorite heroes of the faith. Just throw some out there. What are some of your favorite heroes of faith? It could be some that we've mentioned already. That's fine. Esther. Samson. David. Hannah.
Paul, who cast off John Mark.
Paul. Yep. He cast off John Mark.
Shamgar.
Shamgar. Is he the one that killed the?
With the ox goat.
Yeah. The ox goat. Yeah. Simeon.
No, he wasn't that good, was he? He was the one that tricked the Lord before he circumcised them.
Yes. Yeah. Simeon, maybe not so much.
Mordecai, who gave up his niece to.
Mordecai. Yeah, and Esther. Yeah. So I'm going to keep there's a lot, right? I'm going to go off, roughly speaking, the Hebrews 11, Hall of Faith. So you have mention of Abel, who was killed by Cain, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel. Those are explicitly mentioned by name in Hebrews 11. And then he talks about basically some of the prophets who were persecuted and so on. So I'm throwing in Elijah, Elisha, Daniel, Jeremiah, Zechariah, where we know those men were specifically persecuted. We know that they were persecuted at the time that they were alive. And then Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, who are they? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know them by their Persian or their Babylonian names, but their Hebrew names are Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Now, the question is this: how do you create people like this, or Esthers and Ruths and others that you've mentioned? What did their parents do? I want to know. I want to have a kid like Shadrach, Meshach, or Abednego. It's more than just a name. How do I raise them? What do you know about their parents? Absolutely nothing. For many of them, you could say you don't know who their parents are, or if you do know who their parents are, you're like, they turned out okay, maybe despite their parents. Isn't that a funny thought as well, when you think about if we have an vested interest in creating these kinds of faithful men and women, how come we aren't told the magical formula to do it? Or is there even any consistency when you do know who the parents are? Not so much. Here's one, Job. This is maybe a slightly more clear kind of a parenting thing, but again, this is still adults that he's talking about. But we do see a little bit of attitude. Job 1:5, when the days of the feast had run their course, when the kids would have these feasts, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings, and according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually. Job is often, he was probably a contemporary of Abraham's time, or maybe even before that. So this is just to give a window into the time before, like Abraham, right? Before, like the Jewish people. So this is maybe to answer your question.
He would sacrifice for the sins of his children?
Well, it's an interesting thought, right? I think this says more about Job's heart than that he was, actually like atoning for the sins of his children. You know what I mean? Like,
It's like us, we'd be us like praying.
right? Yeah, praying for our kids or something like that. And again, these are adult kids, anyway.
But that's an altar, right? He's got.
Yeah, he was offering on some kind of altar. Now, this is, of course, a rendition. It's, I think, a Dutch guy, Martin van Heemskerk. So it's almost certainly not what this would have looked like, the scene would have looked like. But I do want to go to Samson, as a couple people have mentioned. His story's in Judges 13. And in Judges 13, essentially an angel comes and tells Samson's parents, Manoah, and I don't remember if Samson's mother's name, but in any case, they're given a promise, you're going to have a special son, this is what you need to do. And this is not parenting advice. It's you're going to keep him from having any fruit, you know, or of the vine, right? You're not going to put a razor to his head. That's not parenting advice. But essentially what we call something like a Nazirite vow. He was under a vow that included not cutting his hair. So they were giving some kinds of instruction concerning their kid, but not like how to raise him, per se. All it says is the woman bore a son and called his name Samson, and the young man grew, and Yahweh blessed him. It's like, and nothing about their parenting. It's almost like, well, Yahweh took care of it. Yahweh blessed him, and he grew up, you know, just fine. Like, I want to know what the parenting was like of a man like Samson. What did they do? They had obviously divine providential intervention to dictate how they were to raise their child. But what was it? What did it look like? I don't know. Yeah, Gary, do you have a comment?
You know, reading that and looking at it and thinking about it, it says to me that it wasn't so much the parents' involvement, but it was direct involvement of God.
Right.
But some parents are perfect and their children, they've raised them in the fear of God, they've done everything, they've been there, but some kids turn away.
You're sort of coming to the conclusion, I think, and we're just looking at the Bible, right? We're just looking at Scripture, and there's a point to all this, just building this up. Judges.
This is true too. You got some bad parents that I've known, and the kids came out great.
Yeah, we'll make that comment in just a second. This, again, a little bit, kind of, sort of parenting. Again, it's of an adult child, though. In Genesis 14:2, Samson's old enough to get married. So he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah, and he tells his parents, go get her for me as my wife. But his father and mother said to him, is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all our people that you must go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she's right in my eyes. And, you know, not very good parenting, maybe. They concede to that. This is, you know, Samson, if you remember, there's the honeycomb in the lion. This is him having gone to Philistia to get his wife, comes back, come across the lion carcass, brings honeycomb to his parents. That's the illustration there. But that's like just this random little snapshot, just like the Job one of like parental attitudes or parenting, you know, of an adult child. And maybe you should not disobey the Lord. No, I'm going to disobey the Lord. And apparently they gave into that. Again, not too much of a glimpse or a window into parenting. So again, you think of Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You think of Joseph. You say, I want kids like them. But what the Bible says about their parents, if it's not nothing at all, it's that they're very imperfect people at best, and you still don't know how they actually raised them. You get comments like Jacob loved Esau, right? And Rachel loved Jacob. Wait. No. Isaac loved Esau, and Rebekah loved Jacob. Did I get that right? Okay, no, right? And we know how that colored things, and you can imagine that was something they did maybe their whole lives, so that's a bad thing. But we meet them when they're all adults, and we get that story when they're all adults. So we don't still even get quite into any kind of parenting, maybe something like don't show favoritism, but you're kind of stretching any parenting advice from these biblical narratives. To what Patrick was just saying, one area where we see kind of these happenstances of like good people having bad kids or bad people having good kids is in the reign of the kings of Judah. Remember, in Israel in the north, they all had bad kings. So if you notice here, this is all red, and those are the kingdoms of Israel. I love that it's blue is good king, light blue is sort of good, dark red is really bad, and pink is sort of bad. So Jehu was just sort of bad in Israel's reign. But here's Judah, okay? And what you notice is Solomon, who was like a half-hearted king. Some say his son Rehoboam was really bad. I guess his son after him was sort of bad. And then you had a good king, Asa, and then Jehoshaphat. But after a good king Jehoshaphat, you had a very bad king Jehoram, and then you had kind of a run there with his kids, Ahaziah, and Athaliah is actually a queen. And then you have a good king, Joash, and you actually have a good run here. Well, I know it says here that these are all blue, but when you look into the text, actually, they were good start, bad end, or mixed. So it's kind of interesting that you had a kind of muddled from Joash to Amaziah and Amaziah to Azariah. These are all sort of half-hearted kings, or started good, ended bad. Athaliah is mentioned here, again, a queen. Why? Because she was the daughter of Ahab, and Ahab was like a notable evil king over here. So his daughter married into a line of Judah, and she was really bad. It was a really bad situation all around. You can read the 2 Chronicles 22. Now I'm very curious how it could be that a good king would have a bad successor, or a bad king would have a good successor. This is one of the most ironic transitions, or shocking transitions, is from Hezekiah to Manasseh. Hezekiah was one of the best kings of Judah. You have many, many chapters about how he did all kinds of reforms and wonderful things. And you know what it says about Manasseh? He undid them all. Now, he came to the throne when he was 12 years old. So perhaps some of it is just that youth, and part of the reason for his insolence, but undoing everything your father did, which is what 2 Chronicles 33 says, that just seems resentful. Why? Why was Manasseh so bad, given Hezekiah and all the wonderful things said about him? You know what the text says?
Evil.
Nothing. It doesn't say anything about the parenting part about it, right? It doesn't say anything about what did Hezekiah do, good, bad, or otherwise, that Manasseh turned out such as he did. It doesn't say. Nor does it say on the converse that Ahaz, who was an evil king, had such a good son, Hezekiah. Nothing. Now, you could make all kinds of guesses as to how these men might have been as parents. Why do pastors' kids always turn out so bad? It's because they're overbearing. You could import that all into this if you wanted, but do you know? No, the text does not say. I don't know how you prevent a Manasseh situation, or whether the text is even trying to teach us how to avoid that situation as parents. It's not that the Bible's not interested in these most basic questions of the creation mandate, to have kids and raise them. It's just that there's really kind of a very simple command. Do you know what the Bible actually explicitly commands with regards to parenting or family? Does it say? Well, get there too, okay? There's two basic kinds of commandments that reiterate the same thing when it comes to parenting. The first is, with regards to parents, teach your kids about God with your words and with your life. Here's Deuteronomy 6:1-9. Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the rules that Yahweh your God commanded me, that's Moses, to teach you, that is the Israelites, as they're about to enter the land, that you may do them in the land to which you are going over to possess it, that you may fear Yahweh your God, you and your son and your son's son, by keeping all his statutes and commandments which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, like creation mandate, as Yahweh, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. The famous Shema, Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one. You shall love Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. Here's the command. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. So you shall teach them diligently. And in every context, when you sit, when you walk, when you lie down, when you rise, you are to constantly be teaching them with your life all the words that I command you. You shall bind them as a sign, and so on. So, you are to teach your kids. Israel was told, teach your kids about God with your words and with your life, and you can go to these other passages in Deuteronomy 4:9, 11, 19, 32, 46. They all say the same thing. Now compare that to Ephesians 6:4. Fathers, this is complementary. This is New Testament, of course. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. It's essentially a reiteration with the emphasis on dads, don't be a jerk. Don't make them angry as you teach them. So it's a heart check thing. But the instruction is essentially the same. Bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. It is the same kind of thing. You shall teach them diligently to your children. And Colossians 3:21 it says almost exactly the same thing as Ephesians there. This really embodies anything the Bible explicitly says about parenting. Now the flip side of it is, of course, and not that this is how to be a kids class, but kids, honor your parents and listen to them. Exodus 20:12, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that Yahweh your God is giving you. And then in the New Testament, reiterated, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. So it's reiterated what children should do and be. Now, this is then really the sum of it. Teach your kids about God. That's all you're required. That's literally the thing as a parent, is to teach them about God. That's the requirement for you. That's like the clearest command about parenting that you will find in the scriptures. Nearly every other passage on parenting or family is in support of these commands. Parents, take seriously the instruction of your kids in the things of God. And kids, listen to your parents, or you're just going to bring shame on yourself or destroy yourself. And that includes the Proverbs. The Proverbs is, when you look at them, and we will go a little bit more in depth in them, when you start reading them, it's essentially, parents, if you care about your kids, you hold them accountable to this, and discipline is a part of that, but essentially, you are responsible for teaching them these things. And then the flip side of many Proverbs is, if you're a kid and you don't do these things, you're just bringing shame and dishonor upon everybody, upon yourself, upon your parents, and just making their lives miserable. But that's more about what the kids on their side for listening. Supplementally, and these are not directly like commands about parenting, but they're related. There is a mandate for younger women to be taught by older women to love their husbands and love their children. But that's a very generic statement, right? Like, okay, parenting, 101, moms, love your kids. No more detail, no more like, okay, I get that, but like how? Or what do I do in this situation? No, just dads, don't provoke them to anger. Moms, love your children. And that's like all it says about motherhood. Explicitly. Elders and deacons, as a part of their qualifications, need to manage their households well and have faithful or submissive children. But how? It just is, that's a qualification of what does it look like? Nothing. It's just this requirement. To the point of, this is not parenting advice, but Israel was to punish disobedient and rebellious children with what? Death. That's reiterated many times. Exodus 21:15, Leviticus 20, Deuteronomy 21:18. Now that's of course Israel. That's a theocratic nation society. That's not the church, and that's not other nations. And it's not so much a parenting thing, right? It's not blaming the parents. It's not saying it's your fault, parents, for these children being so disobedient and rebellious. It's putting it on them as their responsibility. So this is probably not referring to little kids. It's probably referring to, adult or more culpable children. So you're not just talking about a stubborn child that's not cleaning their room. All right, death penalty, I guess. It's out of my, parents are saying it's out of my hands. This is a community discipline, right? This is communal discipline. The people were to go out and stone this child. It wasn't the parent, it's the people. So this is a big deal. It's the whole community doing it. So it's not a parenting thing at all. This is not about, discipline. This is about the consequence that we cannot let a child who's not going to obey their first foremost authority structure, which is your parents, to let you loose and then do that and rebel against all the other authority structures. You can't have that. You're going to destroy society.
That's one of the great critics always bring that up. But what Vernon McGee said is he said there's no example of this ever occurring.
Right. So, maybe the specter of it was enough, or the fact that they didn't do it is why they went so haywire during the time of the judges and during the time of the kings in Israel, because maybe they did not take this kind of command seriously. So either way, it wasn't done, and probably to their dismay and destruction. We do have a comment, of course, in Hebrews 12:7 through 11. It's really about the Lord's discipline of us, but he says, what earthly father doesn't discipline his children? So, but by discipline, what do we mean? Holding them accountable, instructing them in the ways of God, and holding them accountable. Again, we'll get to Proverbs and a corporal punishment. Is that what's right? Yeah, bodily punishment, spanking or things like that. We will talk about some of that. But that is, again, to reinforce the same basic command here, is to teach your kids about God with your words and your life, and hold them accountable to it. Again, for the kids' part, you listen. There's how that looks, how often you do that, whether that means quiet times, whether that means, you read scripture 3 times a day, 1 time a week. None of that, there's no details about any of that and how that looks, only that it's happening. This is, in one sense, the frustration of doing a parenting seminar, but also the freedom of it. And I also hope, at least one of my goals is that any guilt anybody has about either how you were as parents or how you were parented, or any shame associated with that, by knowing that there is not some kind of perfect paradigm that you fell short of, or that your parents fell short of, that you can blame and accuse them, or you can say, that's why I turned out the way. Then you don't have any room for that. There's both freedom and also robbing you of any need to or want to feel like a victim in this. And looking at the Bible's picture, there is no set standard or way. There's a lot of freedom, but in that freedom is you don't get to blame people for stuff. You don't get to just put it all on your parents.
What about Adam? Can we blame him?
Well, there you go. If you want to you blame Adam. You can take it all the way back to Adam and Eve, the first parents. Yeah. Another comment I will make is that though there's no guidelines, I think that it's just, some of it is it's so obvious it doesn't need to be said. Yeah. It's just so obvious it doesn't need to be detailed. That you as parents, you don't just have a kid and then you just drop them off in the middle of the woods and you say, well, I hope you're good to go. There's something very natural about parenthood that's just taken for granted, such that Paul says, we were gentle among you like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. Right? That's a natural thing to happen, that there's a natural affection that you don't have to give a parenting class on. You as a mother, you didn't make sure that you feed that child. Right? That should go without saying. Now, does it happen? Horrifying stories of neglect. Of course, it happens where the parents have no natural affection and just, murder their children. But, for most of history and society and civilizations, that's a natural thing. Or here what Paul says not too long after that in 1 Thessalonians, for you know how, like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you, encouraged you, and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God. Just that fatherly care and instruction, it's been the natural normal for civilization. You almost don't have to say it. So Paul's assuming you know what that is like, to say, like a father with his children. I don't need to elaborate more. You kind of know what that's like. So yeah, some of the answer is there are certain things that are just so universal. Why bother to say them in any kind of parenting seminar? Moms, don't let your kids starve, especially when they're babies. Dads, be there and give some kind of instruction or encouragement or discipline, according to Hebrews 12. Those things almost go without saying. But specifics, details, plans, paradigms, 1 step, 5 step, 10 step, none. Another general principle I forgot here, 2 Corinthians 12:14. Children are not obligated to save up for their parents, but parents for their children. And Paul's just stating kind of a general principle everyone knows, that the parents are the ones expected to take care of and provide for their little children, that it's not supposed to be the other way around. Must be talking about little children, because when you get older, you do take care of your parents. So this is clearly talking about young parents. But again, it's so natural, so expected, there's not worth saying it, that part of the parental duty is to provide for, make sure their kids survive and are set up for success. But how does that look? Specifics, details? The Bible is so bereft of those things, it can be frustrating or it can be freeing. Everything you've just heard today, I know is long, essentially is all that the Bible says very clearly. Everything we've talked about and said and saw is pretty much all that the Bible really does say. You can find other verses that say very similar things. We didn't go through all the Proverbs. We will come to that. But they all are supporting the same ideas. You've looked at now in very, very quick form almost all that the Bible explicitly has to say about parenting. And you're realizing on the one hand, it says a lot, sort of, but in another way, not a whole lot at all either. I think as we continue in this over the next few weeks, as we think about that, we're operating in a very grace-filled zone because of that, where I'm thankful that God, our Heavenly Father, knows us. And we will talk about how the gospel intersects with all of these things, because if there's that kind of gray space, if there's that kind of not a lack of clarity, as if God's not speaking clearly about what a man is or a woman is or what a husband is, a wife is, a father and mother, but just in that, here's what you must do. There, I think, is what God is calling us to, is a whole heaping load of faith. If it's not that clear, right? Parenting is kind of like this nebulous zone, for all that we've seen. I think that parenting then must be one of those things you do with a great deal of faith. That if there's anything that would draw people to the Lord, it should be having children, because how could you not be absolutely at a loss? What am I supposed to do with this little baby, right? And shouldn't that not draw you to the Lord? And it's just a height of, rebellion for people to not care about babies. It doesn't matter whether you have kids or not, but for you not to care about babies in general, societally, civilizationally. You need to care about babies. It takes a great deal of faith to care about children and what happens to them, whether you are yourself a parent or not. You must care, because this is something that requires so much faith. I get concerned. Just end with this. I know we're going long, but I just recently heard, Korea, they're having literally feminists and anti-feminists wars. And I don't mean taking up arms, but social media, all kinds of crazy things where the men and women of Korea are hostile, and it's increasing. I thought it was just small minority of voices being really loud on the internet. But it's been increasing, where advertisers have to take into account that there's hostility between, feminists and anti-feminists, feminist women and anti-feminist men. They're having to adjust their advertising to accommodate for this clash. Their civilization is done. You don't have kids in that kind of context, right? And there is such a disdain for the creation mandate there. And of course, Korea has one of the most, if not the most, catastrophically low birth rate. It goes together. All these things go together. They're increasingly a godless kind of people, faithless.
You have a little insight to that culture. I mean, it seems pretty strange that this Asian culture, way over there,
Yeah.
And in the West, it's not even as extreme.
Yeah.
It sort of is, but they really aren't.
Especially Korea, which had a huge explosion of Christianity. You know, some of the biggest churches in the world used to be in Korea. And yet within, say, a generation almost, or two generations, now you have such a hostile to life environment. Like, it's hostile to life and civilization and culture. I don't know. I mean, it's one of the answers is that things that happen there culturally, because they're so homogeneous, it happens like lightning fast. So if a trend comes in and it catches, it's across the whole peninsula, it just in a flash. So it just spreads like very quickly, and I think once it got in, like this idea, say modern ideas of feminism got in there, it just took off very quickly, and then of course like a counter movement just as quickly sparked after that. But I mean, the issues with the birth rate preceded even those kinds of laws. I can't even say. It just maybe is. With the advent of Christianity, there came a cultural Christianity, not like a real faith, but a hypocritical, a shallow kind of faith. And that became maybe some kind of like fertilizer for cultural, unrest, because then you can get a counter action to that conservatism and all those things. I don't know. I mean, I wish I could say, I don't even know if Korea knows. I feel like they're just neglecting, like turning a blind eye to the situation there, because it's bad. Like, they're going to be done in 100 years. There's not going to be Korean culture. I know, you would think so, but it just like that. There's something to me, and when I think of Korea, just again the homogeneousness of it, that when things happen, it covers the whole peninsula in a flash. So you think here trends, they kind of like ripple, and they take their time, even in the modern like social media age. But you still have Southern culture, and you've got like Pacific Northwest culture, and you got East Coast culture. You still even have those, even as trends might permeate. But Korea, it's like almost like all in, like everybody, all at the same time nearly. And there's no like, there's only action reaction, and maybe not for things to kind of just reverberate and hit a wall of like, well, us East Coasters, we don't do what you do over there on the West Coast. It's nothing, almost nothing like that. It's just homogeneous, just boom.
I was kind of shocked to find out that there's a faction of modern feminists, young feminists, who refer to babies as parasites.
Yeah, well, I've heard that a lot.
That's terrible.
That's almost.
What kind of a person would be?
Yeah, it's a parasitic being, like by the biological definition of a parasite. Yeah, and so what is abortion? I mean, it's if you want it, it's a child. If you don't want it, it's a parasite. Who's against removing a parasite, that you don't want?
I guess if you think that, then that's what will
Yeah.
justify your thinking.
Yeah. So, and I think you can see how that's a disdaining of the creation mandate. So anyway, I know we took a big chunk out of the Bible today, but you did basically get a bird's eye view of almost all that the Bible has to say about parenting, and we've thought of basically considered a lot of different angles biblically of parenting, and we come to the conclusion we come to. And again, my argument is that parenting then must be just such a faith-filled activity that must be done by the grace of God and dependence upon Him, that there's a clear connection between parenting and our need for the gospel. Because you're raising a child who did not exist apart from your doing. This is your responsibility more than anything else on the planet, because you caused it. You put it into being. Yes, the Lord did it, but like Eve said when she made Cain, like, I've created this like Yahweh did, or created this with Yahweh's help. Like, you did something there, and if that does not cause you to fall upon your knees and cry out to God, what must I do? I'm going to fail in being the kind of parent I need to be. How could that not make you beeline towards the cross and the gospel of Jesus and faith? But for so many, they don't. And this is, I think, the opportunity all of us have, whether you're a parent or not. When you talk to parents, you have a quick beeline. How do you not have a quick beeline to the forgiveness of sins and the gospel of Christ and hope there is in Him anytime you meet a parent? You have an opportunity to share, because how are they not? Again, a desperate parent, that's redundant. You have something to offer the desperate.